Hello. Yeah, okay. Right. It works. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Uh, we have this panel. Let me just clarify that it talks about geopolitics and the evolving situation for Pakistan, but actually, we're going to talk mostly about geoeconomics because geoeconomics is not economics. Geoeconomics, as a term, has evolved since the 1990s in the West, especially in the US, has to do with the use of economic instruments for geopolitics. The reason we're going to have this panel is that the national security policy that was unveiled in the previous government's tenure talks about geoeconomics, but it defines geoeconomics from a completely different perspective. Just to give you a sense of how this term has evolved in the US, let me just quote from two works. One is a work, a 1990 national interest article by Edward Luttwak. And Luttwak's article was titled From Geopolitics to Geoeconomics, Logic of Conflict, Grammar of Commerce. And his basic argument was that the grammar of commerce has not upstaged the logic of conflict, but that this is the best term I can think of. He's talking about his own use of the term to describe the admixture of the logic of conflict with the methods of commerce. So essentially, as I said, the use of economic tools or instruments for geopolitical purposes, which essentially means that it's trade not for trade, but for geopolitical reasons. That's where you bring in carrots and sticks, incentives, as well as coercive tools like sanctions, increased tariffs, etc., etc. And then this work was followed by another one, which came out in 2016-17, War by Other Means, Geoeconomics and Statecraft. It was by Robert Blackwell and Jennifer Harris. And they say policies governing everything from trade and investment to energy and exchange rates are wielded as tools to win diplomatic allies, punish adversaries, and coerce those in between. So in our case, in the case of the national security policy, the use of the term geoeconomics is essentially in contradistinction, and that's a point that needs to be emphasized, in contradistinction to the rentier geopolitical approaches that this country took over the last 70, 73 years. So our session is essentially going to talk about, with my panelists, I'm going to talk about how that can be actualized and whether we need to more clearly define this. The panelists have already been introduced. So let me begin with you, Niels. So national security policy defines it in a certain way, but as I said, there's a different approach to it that has evolved in the US and in Europe. So give us a sense of how this works. You got the Ukrainian conflict, you have the primary and secondary sanctions against the Russian Federation, the trade ties have been reduced, and by the looks of it, perhaps the idea is to bring them to zero. The northern corridor is all but gone. And we're talking about the southern corridor, someone is talking about the middle corridor, etc., etc. So give us a sense of where Europe stands and how this is in contrast to the neoliberal trading order.
Yes, thank you very much. And first I want to thank the organizers for inviting us and giving me the opportunity to speak here. You mentioned rightly geoeconomics, geopolitics, and how the two of them are tied together in Europe is a new hot topic. Being a German, talking about geopolitics, geoeconomics still feels somehow strange because Germany has been geopolitically, geoeconomically illiterate, so to say. During the Cold War, we were under the US and NATO umbrella. We were happily selling our products to the world, and we had no ambitions beyond that. And we strongly believed that by building trade ties, economic cooperation with countries in our neighborhood and beyond that, including Russia, China, we would come to a mutual understanding, to lasting peace, to development that benefits both sides. But the Ukrainian war was a wake-up call, or like a harsh wake-up for us, that this kind of approach that increase trade ties, increase economic ties, and then build lasting peace, this approach is not working anymore. And now we find ourselves in a world where for which we are not prepared. Germany has no national security strategy. You mentioned Pakistan's national security strategy. Germany is going to publish its first national security strategy in the coming weeks. We have no China strategy. We have our Russia strategy is in shambles. So we are really in a moment in our history when we have to start fresh. I think what we can see with the Ukraine war is that it's kind of a catalyst. We are now transforming our energy, our economy more to a sustainable economy. We are trying to get away from gas, from coal as quickly as possible because they became so expensive. And also with a look to China, we are trying to diversify our economic engagement since we do not want to have the same situation that we were facing with Russia, that we were 55% dependent on Russian gas imports for our economy. We do not want to find ourselves in the same spot with China. But as of the moment, we are heavily dependent on China. China is Germany's largest trading partner. All the big companies are invested into China. So we cannot afford decoupling, but we have to diversify. And this is something that we are learning now. We are very new to this. Pakistan is not, so maybe we can learn something from Pakistan. We are learning how to deal with a world that is not so friendly to us as it used to be, and we are still struggling to do so.
Thanks, Niels. I'm going to follow up with another question, but let me just do the round here. But park that question with reference to its impact on the domestic politics of Germany within the ruling coalition. Okay, hold on. Let me use this. Yeah, okay. So, Ghias, I just wanted to ask you, you lead a, business venture, you're one of the business leaders. Now, the national security policy talks about geoeconomics in terms of a pivot that takes us away from the rentier geopolitical approaches of the past. But it also, of necessity, talks about connectivity, it talks about trade partnerships, it talks about business-to-business partnerships, and it essentially, by its own admission, citizen-centric. Now, given the geopolitical situation, on the East as well as the West, how do you think we can actually attract investment, foreign development investments, and not just for the purposes of consumption, but export-oriented?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum everyone, and I want to thank the organizing team here for inviting me to this very important session. So Ejaz, first things first, we have to first thank God for the country that He's all blessed us with in terms of our geographical location. Pakistan was part of the ancient Silk Route. We're actually neighbors to two of the largest economies in the world. And, that's a blessing, China and India. We are what connects landlocked countries in Central Asia, give them access to Middle East, Africa for trade. Gawada being one of the best ports of its kind, actually cut down the distance for any trade to Western China by many days, creating a huge opportunity. We could potentially become a trade hub. Now the problem has been that Pakistan has always assumed the role of its geographical location in the theater of global conflict, not in the theater of global trade or regional trade. That's the problem. And if we were to assume or change that role, then a few things need to happen. First things first, we need to put our house in order. Now when we say putting our house in order, I'm not going to bore you with the economic measures that need to be taken. I think we all know, whether it's documentation of the economy or broadening of the tax base, becoming more productive, increasing exports, privatization, deregulation. I think we've heard it all. But putting our house in order and addressing the economics part of everything is number one. Secondly, economics has to drive foreign policy, not emotions. And there are several examples of that. So China and US, one can argue that is going to be the biggest war that will get, not war in terms of traditional war, but you know, the war for power, one can say, or economic might, one can say, is going to be played out. They have $700 billion of trade every year. India and China, right? You know, opposing powers, they have $130 billion of trade. Pakistan does not do any trade with 91% of its border. So we have to come to terms with the fact that our foreign policy has to be led by economic realities, right? And that is, I think, the crux of the national security policy also, I believe. The third thing is that we can't play camp politics. So 15% of our products are exported to US. Roughly 35% are exported to the European Union. Half of our remittances come from the GCC. And then China is the one which has come and invested $50 billion in our infrastructure. So which camp will we choose? Now, experts say that eventually Pakistan will have to choose a side. But I think it's in our collective benefit that we push that choice out as much as possible in time. And right now, don't play camp politics. I mean, you have an example of India, right? Is India is dealing with Russia, it's dealing with America, and you know, to touch upon the subject that was being talked about earlier on Kashmir, why does India get time of the day? It's because they're an economic might. So we have to really come to terms with that.
So, okay, so this is a great opportunity to go to Dr. Baqai. Now, there are two things here. One is that the neoliberal trading order is kind of, you know, in doldrums, in the sense that we've seen this approach of trading within blocks and sanctioning the adversaries, and those that are on the fence to either incentivize them or also coerce them. So increasingly, this idea of not choosing a particular block becomes difficult. And secondly, given the fact that India, frankly, is not interested. I mean, they're hurting us, which is evident in an adversarial model within the larger ambit of realpolitik. They're not interested. So, and I don't think that we really have a viable policy to address that. So give us a sense of how we should approach this. One, staying away from blocks, and two, dealing with India.
So if I had an answer to dealing with India, I would be the recipient of a Nobel Peace Prize. Mohan tried, didn't work. Anyways, that was on a lighter note. But I'm going to just take the discussion slightly forward. We are so used to superpower politics for decades now that we do not bring into discussion the new developments that are taking place and how they are changing both the geopolitics and the geoeconomics in the global arena. For one, I think we are discounting the role of middle powers. And middle powers today are, it's not just Pakistan that is not for camp politics. There are a lot of middle powers who are sick and tired of being pushed into camp politics, where they're being asked to make a choice. Of course, Pakistan is a country whose foreign policy at best can be described as an entity which only works with constraints and compulsions. There are very few options and choices. On the other hand, India has become a country with its economy taking over the British economy, as a country that has options and choices. So I think it is not ever fair to say if India is doing this, why can't Pakistan do this? We cannot do this because wars in today's world are not fought on conventional fronts. They're fought on the economic front, they're fought on the diplomatic front, they're fought on the propaganda front, and on the intellectual front. And on all of these fronts, we have left our post unmanned. That is the reality of the situation. I'm going to give you a few examples here, if you'll allow me, and why middle powers are going to play an increasingly important role in tomorrow's politics. It's the demography. It's the geography. It's the 21st century regionalism, which is not about intra-regional bloc. It's about inter-regional collaboration. So today, what is India pushing in the summit that is going to happen to India? When the world would want to talk to them about what they're doing to their minorities, they will sell the whole concept of Eurasia and how they can play a critical role there. So I don't think this distinction between geopolitics and geoeconomics is real. It's one. And secondly, and more importantly, you spoke about this economic arsenals that have always been used. Now, please tell me, when was it in this global politics when economic arsenals were used against another superpower? They were always used against middle powers. US used economic, and US is a country that has used economic sanctions the most everywhere in the world. If the international community and the UN will not impose sanctions, US will come out and unilaterally impose sanctions. That is how they function and work. But this is the first time that they have imposed sanctions on Russia. And as much Western propaganda as there can be, they have not been able to hurt Russia they would like to. Now, this is going to change Chinese behavior, because China is very closely watching at two things. One is, how are these sanctions against another superpower working or not working? And two, China has conveniently backed off with proposing this nexus that it originally was okay with Russia. So those are things that China is doing. I think these are the things, so how China reacts to the situation, the middle powers, 21st century regionalism is going to determine the forthcoming politics. And last but not least, there's just an interesting thing that I want to see. Look around, ladies and gentlemen. It is China that is determining the foreign policy thrust of Washington, New Delhi. And in some ways, Putin is also looking at China. So it's not who the superpower is. It is what is happening on the ground. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, right now, I feel like Pakistan because the sun is shining directly on me. And I need to remove my jacket because
I thought it got nervous because of my response. I made him nervous.
Okay. No, I'm happy you talked about the middle powers, because one of the things that the Indian Foreign Minister Jaishankar has been constantly talking about, with reference to the pressure to sort of, not reach out to the Kremlin, is where he's talking about multipolarity and all that. So I think in many ways we're kind of in a state of flux in terms of how the world is evolving. But Dr. Rabia Akhtar, from a security perspective, we talk about connectivity, we talk about obviously the importance of trading within the region, and frankly, this is a no-brainer. But the reason why some of these things have not happened, or perhaps might not happen in the near future, are also grounded in not just realpolitik, but in terms of India's desire to project power also in Machtpolitik. So there was a sense of how we square these two requirements.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I would like to begin by thanking the organizers for having our panel here. So in terms of security, national security policy is pretty big on internal security dynamics and external security dynamics. And in the interest of time, I'll just like to make 2 points, one on internal security and the other on external security. So Pakistan in the past 2 decades has fought the biggest counterterrorism campaign. And yet here we are in the grips of terrorism again. So where did we go wrong? Firstly, with respect to TTP, we released TTP prisoners. We went to Afghan Taliban and told them that they need to broker a deal for Pakistan. And then we did not establish any red lines with Afghan Taliban with respect to not providing safe havens to TTP inside Afghanistan. That's where we went wrong. And if we still do not learn any lessons from this going forward and still believe that Afghan Taliban are our solution for TTP, then the situation is not going to be resolved anytime soon. With respect to strategic depth, you all have read a lot of researches on strategic depth and Pakistan's flawed policy over the period of decades. But I think it's about time somebody did research on as to how Taliban have managed to gain strategic depth in Pakistan and now using that to their advantage. So it's the flip side of the coin, and I think the strategy has been marvelous over the period of years. So that's on internal security. If we want to bring out any change, I think some realization needs to happen. With respect to external security and the dynamics therein, so the conversation from internal security cannot be divorced from external security with respect to foreign policy. Ghias made excellent points on as to how economics needs to drive foreign policy. So for years on end, since our conception of Pakistan, we have heard that India has hegemonic designs and India is the power that we need to deal with. But with respect to, Pakistan has now entered a stage where Pakistan is fighting a two-front war. Not only our eastern border is hostile, but our western border is also hostile. And if we don't take notice of that and we do not develop a strategy for which we have zero playbook as to how to fight this two-front war, we are going to be at loss going forward. So that's one point on that. NSP talks about global realignment. It talks about regional connectivity. It talks about Pakistan's potential of being the transit hub. And all of this is right. We do have the potential, but any policy is as good as the strategy to execute it and the institutions to have that ability to execute that strategy. So having NSP was great, but what do we do from here onwards? Where do we go? Do we have the institutions? Do we have the political stability? Do we have the leadership in Pakistan right now which can give us that direction? So to me, if geoeconomics is the pivot that NSP claims it to be, then security is the pivot of that pivot. And I think we need to realize that. Thank you.
So, Ejaz, a couple of things. One is that some of the countries are focused on developing capacities, not doing everything, because it's difficult to do everything. But they have done specific things that make them, that give them the weightage. For instance, we know the relations between China and Taiwan. When Nancy Pelosi went to Taiwan, the Chinese slapped certain sanctions on the Taiwanese. But one thing they did not sanction, the semiconductors, because they would have kneecapped their own industries, including their military potential, if they had sanctioned semiconductors from Taiwan. The point that I'm trying to make is, A, do we have the capacity, given various constraints, do we have the capacity to actually identify and focus on a couple of areas which not only get us foreign exchange, but also make us inevitable, if you will, for the rest of the world?
So before I answer that question, and let's talk first about what's wrong, because then if we identify the
Sorry, one interjection. We also have very short time. I want to open it to the floor. So just 10 minutes here, and then we're going to open it.
be very good. So currently, which have been the in the last 5 years, which have been the biggest asset classes that have given you returns? The number one return you would have gotten from investing in a car, right? Real estate. So in a nutshell, if you invest in the stock of the company that manufactures the car, your money would have gone down by 2/3. But if you bought a car, you would have made a 70% return. So that's a problem, right? So we do not encourage investment in productive sectors. And that's why, we suffer from from lack of export. Do we have potential? Absolutely. You've got $85 billion of copper reserves. You've got $30 billion roughly of gold reserves, and then multiple other minerals. That's a natural advantage that has been gifted to Pakistan, and now we see it playing out with the revival of the Ricodec project as well. We have 37 million hectares of arable land. Netherlands is 16 times smaller than us and has an export of $68 billion. Moment for us to think about, but again, that's another gift that has been given to us. We've got billions and billions of tons of coal reserves that we had to wait till 2019 to take advantage of. And in turn, what we've done, we import $26 billion a year of energy. So imagine what we have done to ourselves. So I think it starts first by having a policy framework which promotes investment in productive sectors. Right? If we start at that point, then the world will automatically open up to buy products or services from Pakistan. We've got another thing that I missed out. I'm sorry, we've got 150 million people below the age of 30. We're the 4th largest English-speaking country in the world. And we've now seen enough success of technology companies. We need to scale that up. We need to scale up skill development, not giving degrees which are irrelevant now and not monetizable. So if we can shift to the right kind of skill development of those skills which are marketable internationally, so in a nutshell, it's heartbreaking. I get very emotional here because if we don't need to create advantages, if we've got it. It's just a matter of the right policy framework which then pushes capital towards those opportunities. हम यहाँ पे real estate से बाहर ही निकल
रहे. So Niels, one, give me your, you heard the panelists here. So one, give me a sense of how you look at the situation. It's like the outside-in view. And the other question that I'm certainly interested in getting a response to, within the coalition and ironically, if you will, one of the most hawkish group within the coalition are the Greens. So give us a sense of that, but starting with how you look at the situation here and how, the outside-in view that I said you might give.
Yeah, thank you very much. To the first question, I absolutely concur with everything that has been said here, and I want to underline we have brought a delegation of parliamentarians from Pakistan to Germany just last week, and we were having the same discussions, so that there's huge potential also from a German point of view, from a European point of view, to diversify in Asia, and Pakistan naturally is one of the most promising areas for European businesses to diversify. But the house has to be in order, and this is something that has to come from the inside, and I think everything that has been said here is also what has been said from the German side, from businesses, but also from politicians, that businesses are willing to look into engaging more in Pakistan, but the environment has to be more promising, more safe, and more benefiting for them. So I think there is, if we do our homework here, then we will be rewarded in one way or another. So I think this is the right discussion to have. The second, you are absolutely right. In Germany, we have coalition governments. We are, as FES, we are a political foundation associated with the Social Democrats, the party of the Chancellor. And we come from a tradition of engagement with Russia, with China. We have been through the Cold War and where we were in the Western camp, but we were still doing business with the Soviet Union. We were buying gas from the Soviet Union despite all the crises that went on through the Cold War. And then you can see how shocked we are now and how unexpected it came to us that in another crisis, suddenly Russia stops engaging with us. They stopped exporting energy to Europe, which has never happened before. And this started some kind of soul searching that is still going on. But we, as Social Democrats, coming from the tradition of engaging, we are not as hawkish as the Greens, our smaller coalition partner, you rightfully said. And there's some kind of irony, because the Green Party, they came up in the 80s and they were strongly aligned with the peace movement in Germany. So they were the party of peace, the party of pacifism. And now they're the party of supporting Ukraine to the utmost. And they believe in a way in camp politics that you have democracies against autocracies, that this is a global struggle. The Social Democrats, I can only speak for them, do not believe in that. We have, even though some countries might have different sets of values or different kinds of governments that we would not accept for ourselves in our country, we still have to engage with them because we live together in this world and we cannot expect everybody to be like us. So this is some tension in the German government that also translates into geopolitics, geoeconomics. And as I said earlier, we are now in the process of formulating our national security strategy, or even more importantly, our China strategy. And these are the battles that are being fought within the German government, and they have not been decided yet.
It's interesting because last time when Joschka Fischer was the foreign minister and there was the bombing of Yugoslavia, there was a major discussion within the Greens, with one side being the pragmatists and the other being the idealists. But anyway, we're going to open this to the audience. Please ask a short question, identify yourself. I have to close it at 4:30 because Dr. Rabia and I have to rush to the airport after that, and you don't want us to miss our flight.
Sir, I have a question to Mr. Niels. Question is that when the Soviet Union was abolished, there was no direct threat to USA or NATO. And after the abolition of Soviet Union, their military pact, Warsaw Pact, was also abolished. When there was no direct threat to USA and NATO, so why NATO was not abolished? Because today I think the most dirtiest role in the geopolitics is played by NATO, backed by America. So why NATO is not abolished? And second thing is that, can Germany come out from the NATO? Please.
Okay, my name is Muhammad Irfan, and okay.
Ghias, it's directed to you, and maybe anybody else can. The figures you quoted and the wealth of resources we are sitting on, and we have never explored them to our potential. That is true for a lot of African countries, some of South Asia, and some of East Africa, basically, and us more so. So is it that we are essentially, the political leadership, stupid, the word we are stupid, not to explore it? Or have we been caught by a clever neighbor who engages us in all this, and the headmaster US, that has been our ally at the face of it, and the NATO question was already, that has not engaged or given us the impetus. Are we just stupid not to explore that resources, or have we been caught up by the allies that we make? Is it political or is it economics?
Okay, my name is Muhammad Irfan, and I'm working in the government sector. My question is brief and short. Is there any hope? I mean, for the past 75 years, we have been going to the same situation. And related to that comment, putting your house in order, I mean, what is the one practical measure that Pakistani people or the government can take to put our house in order? One practical measure from each of the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Briefly to the NATO question, which naturally is a very complicated one, but the German perception of NATO is very positive. So NATO allowed us to cut down on our defense spending and kind of free ride on US provided security and spend the money on developing our economy or other things. So there's also tension within NATO that this free riding attitude of Germany, Donald Trump was very prominent in criticizing this, has to come to a stop. And in fact, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we increased our military spending significantly. To talk about why NATO was not abolished. So if you look at Europe, it's also like a very diverse continent, and you have Eastern Europe, which is now part of NATO. You have countries in the Baltic states, Poland, Czech Republic, and others. They have a long history with Russia, and this history is mostly about bad experiences. It's way before the Second World War. It goes back to the 19th century, 18th century, and there's a sense of threat in many of these countries, and they were seeking security against this threat. For rational or irrational reasons, it doesn't really matter, because if it's politically relevant, it's there. So for them, NATO is not the bad guy, it's the good guy protecting them from Russia. And if you look at what happens now, they say we were right. Yeah, so we were right to engage with NATO. We were right to go into NATO, because otherwise we might be Russia's next target. So this is the discussion within Europe, and this has the Russian policy in a way gave NATO also a new purpose. So NATO was more or less irrelevant. The French president said it's brain dead. Yeah, now NATO is as alive as ever, not because of a development within NATO, but because of a new external or renewed external threat. So if this was the design or the goal of Russian policy, mission accomplished, but I think it was not. But now there's a real sense of threat in Europe, and NATO, for many countries, Germany included, is the answer to that.
In fact, let me just add one point. In the early 90s, it wasn't the US that was interested in expanding NATO. There were voices from within Europe, like the late Václav Havel was one. There were other, as Niels said, Poland and the Baltic republics have a long history. Also, Finland have a long history with reference to Russia and the Russian threat. Ghias, the question about resources, the resource.
I think it's a great question about that, whether people are stupid or what has actually gone wrong. And I think two things have gone wrong. Number one, we've relied too much on internal consumption of the Pakistani population for growth. And जो आपका कोई भी sectors, all the sectors, right? Steel, fertilizer, agriculture, cement, all the big industries, they've been power. A lot of investment went into them to serve the local consumption, right? And that is why in the last, I would say, 2 decades, we've gone into this cycle of running out of foreign exchange, because as a country, we don't sell enough products and services to the world. 2012 में हमारी export 25 I'm just coming to that. There's a desire by the political forces to show or demonstrate growth in the country, economic growth, GDP growth. But that GDP growth, that economic growth has come from industries and businesses that have been very internally focused and not externally focused. One reason here. Second reason is that unfortunately our politicians, because of the vulnerability of their positions and vested interests, have always put short-term political interest over long-term economic gain. The switch we need to make is maishat pehle, siyasat baad mein. And that is what people need to force. Because you have so many examples. This government put tax on retailers. वो किसी politician को बुरा लगा, वो कमरे से उठ के चले गए, वो that step got reversed. Why isn't agriculture taxed? Why isn't real estate taxed? Why isn't retail sector taxed? Because they're unpopular by definition in the short term. Why aren't companies privatized? Because in the short term, these are unpopular. And the politicians have a very short-term view, because no prime minister has ever completed 5 years. Don't forget that. So there is a systemic reason of why they think short-term. And then obviously there has been a gradual decline in competence also, which is there.
To say something, I and Nish was having this discussion before this session also. Potential is a very dangerous word. I am a professor, and when a student is doing really well, unwell, he's not performing, I would say you have potential. So we've had potential for 70 years. We've done nothing about it. So just having potential doesn't work. For one, you have to have a strategy. Two, resources. I think we should take lieu from what happened in Africa. Africa was more resource rich than perhaps we are any time of the day. And that country suffers from what we call resource curse. So you need to be careful, what are we doing with these resources? And last but not least, having resources is not enough. By the time you bring them to utility level, you lose control of that resource. And that is the reality of Africa, and that is going to become the reality of Pakistan, with all due respect. That is what is going to happen. So I think these are reasons that you need to address. This young gentleman said, give us one reason how these things can change. There is no one reason. We all need to come together to resolve the situation. And one of the most important is to de-eliticize this country's politics. It is in the hand of 0.02% people who do not allow my benefits or your benefits to even come on the table. Unless we change that, nothing will change.
Yes.
So I'll just address the hope question. So I stand before 18, 19 years old every day, and I just do not have the luxury to not have hope. So I have hope about Pakistan and Pakistan's potential. I believe that, like Ghias said, Pakistan is only 7 decades old. And everybody compares Pakistan with 200-year-old democracies and even other countries that have done really well. I believe that in several iterations, we are in an evolutionary journey, and you've tested martial law, you've tested dynastic politics, you've tested Imran Khan. You will probably test another round of dynastic politics, but you're checking everything out on your list. So there is hope. So in several iterations, several generations later, there will come a leader, there will come leadership, which will put Pakistan first above their own pockets. And I have hope for that day. Thank you.
I wish I had her optimism. India is 70 years old. Bangladesh is younger than us. Sri Lanka. Seriously, how long will we hide behind this? That yes, it will get better. Unless we come together to make it better, it will not get better.
Okay, I actually have a standing joke with Rabia on this. I call her Professor Pangloss, which is a character in Voltaire's Candide. And he is obviously very optimistic. And I actually share Rabia's optimism. I'm kind of somewhere between being optimistic and pessimistic, but I think there are ways in which things can happen. If we, like for instance, would any of us like to live in Iran, for instance? Would any of us like to be a minority in India? Or be in Myanmar? Or be in North Korea? Or be in many of the other countries that we don't talk about? I mean, we are really great at self-flagellation. We should, but at the same time, we should also look at what our potential with what Dr. Baqai said, potential is not enough. I agree with it, but unless you have potential, you cannot even have the strategy. Any other questions? Ji.
Hello. Yes.
Ji, I'm just coming.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Dr. Baqai, always a pleasure to behold. Thank you very much. You reflected broadly about specific things, how traditional warfare might be, has taken a step down over the natural fronts of diplomacy, intellectualism, academia, so on and so forth. My question is to Mr. Khan. Sir, with all due respect, for example, you are a profile at the helm of one of the most apex players in the economy of this country. While we can wax on about the inadequacies of the establishment, when you look at case study examples geopolitically of India, of China, Saudi Arabia recently as well, how much of it can you say is also lack of stimulation of the business community in sort of bridging the gap between the current state of affairs? For example, top of my head, there have been times where those fronts which cannot be addressed through sensitivities of their own, whether they be national, security, religion, and otherwise, they are gapped with capitalism and a consumer mindset. So, sir, please.
My name is Azhar Jamil. I'm an old political worker. I've worked with Mehraj Muhammad Khan all my life. And it's very heartening to hear some of the comments. Riaz Khan has talked about giving economics the priority and then politics. Well, you have to stabilize your politics first before you can stabilize your economics. And I don't have any expectations from the ruling parties, and I've seen them for the last 50 years actively. But we do have a way out, and we have to take ownership of our city to begin with as citizens, and we've created a Concerned Citizens Alliance which has about 15 odd groups and expanding. Our purpose is to ensure that we have empowerment of local government, without which you can't deliver any services to the people. So then the second thing is that we have the expertise in this city to tackle, not just criticize, but provide solutions to every aspect of life, be it the mangroves, which I attended Tariq Kaisar's session did for yesterday, or economic reform. And we have a roundtable seminars on that. But we have to have citizens' action, and we have to combine together as citizens, otherwise we're all going to fail together, and that is my invitation.
We get your point, in fact.
Last but not least, my question to the German friend over here. You know, as someone asked about NATO, what was the need for expansion? And NATO has proved to be the greatest source of war after the Cold War in this planet. I was expecting perhaps the Germans would not, go under, because you have risked all that Ukraine had to do, and Germany had to tell Ukraine was, declare neutrality, say you won't join NATO, there would be no war. And now we are looking down at the lane because of the spinelessness of your leadership. We are looking at the possibility of a nuclear war.
Right, we need to get some questions also. Actually, the question, and I think that's a very important point, with reference to political stability, is the essentially having fiscally empowered local governments. Now, ironically enough, most of the time when we have the military dictatorships, they focus on the local governments, sometimes bypassing the provincial governments. But we also have provincial governments that want devolution from the federal government, but do not want to apply the same principle as far as local governments. And wherever you actually see new political leadership emerging, are countries where you actually have empowered local government. So that's the question I would like to get your take on that. You want to first respond on the NATO thing, or, I mean, it's a little more complex than...
So first, I do not work for NATO, or I'm not a representative of NATO here. I want to add a few things. So what you said is a narrative or a topic that is also present in German discourse. This is a position that is present in the public in Germany and is raised and is represented in the media. But I would like to disagree to some extent, because this narrative that NATO's eastern expansion was triggering this war is a Russian narrative put forward in order to justify Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In fact, and you talked about our spineless leadership, it took a lot of courage from the German and the French in 2008 to deny Ukraine the accession to NATO. We were very hard pressurized by the US at that time, but Germany and France said no, no Ukraine into NATO, because they were afraid of exactly what you told us. So, and there was when our chancellor was meeting with Vladimir Putin almost 1 year ago, 10 days before the invasion, he told him outrightly, Ukraine is not going to be a member of NATO for the next 30, 40 years. So this was very clear to everybody, especially the Russians. So this is a very common narrative, a very common story, but to the best of my knowledge and to the best of my judgment, I don't think it's a factual narrative. It does not represent the facts.
I think it's a great question, and I've been thinking about it, and I think I'm going to, at the expense of sounding a bit defensive, I'll give you my thoughts. I think the one thing we need to keep in mind is that capital, money, it will automatically flow to those opportunities which provide the best risk-adjusted return. I think that's a concept we should not fight. The policy makers have the responsibility of having policies which direct capital to the right productive opportunities. What do I mean by that? I'll give you two examples. So if one is putting up a manufacturing plant today, you'll pay about 33% odd corporate tax. Then when you take dividends from it, you'll pay another 15% withholding tax, and there are several other levies which will take it comfortably over 50%. You buy a piece of land today, sell it after 4 years for 5 times the price, you'll pay zero tax. Right? That's one reason. So who do you hold responsible for that? And if a business person, whether it's you, me, anyone over here, if they take that money and put it in those asset classes, they're not doing anything wrong. It's perfectly legal. But what it's preventing is companies in Pakistan breaking those barriers of $400 million exports, $500 million exports, and we don't still have a $1 billion export company. Because somewhere along the journey, an opportunity comes along which provides a much better return through legal means, through the policy framework which is there in the country. Secondly, the presence of a very big undocumented sector. You know, let's take the example of logistics. It's about 10% of your GDP. Long haul में 3 lakh truck है. Average ownership is 1.4. It's extremely undocumented, unorganized. What is it doing? It is preventing the people in the undocumented sector who don't maintain books, who don't follow laws, to grow. Because after a certain while, you need to go to financiers, banks, capital providers to grow. They just don't have the wherewithal to grow. And they're preventing organized companies to compete. Because organized companies will follow laws, they'll pay taxes, they'll follow safety standards, and they'll just get competed out of the market. And then you ask yourself a question, who's responsible for documenting the economy? So I do think that the responsibility lies more with the policymakers. I think the private sector will do what any smart investor does, which is invest money in the opportunity which gives the best risk-adjusted return, keeping in mind that all laws are followed and everything is done.
So we got 6 minutes left. Dr. Huma Baqai, Dr. Rabia Akhtar, in that order. Any last thoughts with reference to this discussion?
I would actually want to comment what Ghias has said. You see, our business community, he's absolutely right. But then your corporate social responsibility is a lie. Because it is just about spending some money and not really, because I think the business community, especially in a country like Pakistan, really does not realize its potential and its ability to impact the policymakers. You remember when in Karachi the situation was really bad, it is our business community that had gone to Ishratul Abad and had said, fix this, and the rangers were called in. So I think that you people can play a role, and with the situation that we exist right now, you have to. You had asked me a question on India earlier on. I'm going to say something extremely provocative here. we need to realize we are a smaller country. India has grown both economically and otherwise by leaps and bounds. And what has India done? Its trade volumes with China have grown in year 2022 when it fought an active war in Ladakh and lost land to China. Their trade volumes have not gone down, their trade volumes have gone up. While all of this is happening, Russia-China trade volumes have also gone up because Russia has used the opportunity of Russia getting decoupled from the West to trade with Russia. China has done that. Iran has also done that. When will Pakistan realize the fact that it has to make some unemotive decisions about its economy, including having better relations with India, functional relations with India, and a realistic understanding of the western border that is Afghanistan. This love of Afghanistan is costing us a lot.
I'll keep it very brief. Once again, I think, as the gentleman stated, all of us sitting here, each face in the crowd or up here, we are the change and we can bring change. You just need to have faith in yourself. And again, with whatever experimentation Pakistan has done, no amount of comparisons with other countries is going to do it unless internal realization comes in. And that's where Dr. Baqai and Ghias are absolutely right, that we need to set our own house in order. It might sound as cliche as it can be, but this realization of reforming your economy, your all sectors, even civil service reforms, everything needs to be reformed. But the change comes from the citizens as well. It is not only a top-bottom approach, it has to be a bottom-up approach as well. And in the past year or so, there has been a citizen realization with respect to the change that needs to come. So let's have hope about us, and going forward, we all are going to make things work. Thank you.
I'm greatly tempted to actually have a session on your provocative comment, but unfortunately we have to leave. Thank you so much. Incidentally, at the Center for Strategic Studies and Policy Research, which is housed in the University of Lahore, Dr. Rabia Akhtar is the director of that. We're actually doing a project, we're doing a couple of projects with reference to the national security policy, the areas, identifying various areas in terms of how to actualize those salient points, because it's not enough to say that we need to do this. It's important also to figure out how we can do that. And that how has to also look at the ground realities and not just, be something in the air. But thank you so much to the panelists. Give them a hand, and that's the close of the session.
Thank you so much.